Good morning, everyone. It is Saturday,
No,
February 8th at 10:15 a.m. Juanito and I
no
are
fucking
traveling.
warning. We're literally in different rooms of the same hotel at this point. Like we're
Juanito and I
floors
are
apart.
Juanito and I are traveling. The podcast is delayed by a day, but here we are. How are you, Costin? I expect we'll be talking to you a lot on this episode because we have some European news that I want to get to.
European fucking.
And
Oh
I want
God.
let's start right there then. First of all, how are you, Costin?
Doing well, doing well. It's a particularly interesting time of the year here because it was summer until like a week ago, and now we have a bit of snow, like just a tiny bit of snow, and everyone is like going crazy, like snow, snow, like the global warming is totally fake, and like yeah, doesn't matter that it was summer until yesterday, but like
How
now.
abnormal is that in Romania? Like I'm not familiar with the
I mean, when I was little, like 20 years, well, 20,
20 years ago when I was
20
little.
years
years
ago.
ago, when I was
How about 45 years?
40 years ago, the snow was like 2 meters tall, which is like 6 feet or something like that in American meters. And nowadays we get
Some
zero
dust.
point 0.1 millimeters or
Oh
something.
wow.
Really? It's been that dramatic.
I mean, you can't deny that the global warming is here.
Oh, but
It's
you can.
doesn't get that more obvious than that. Well, of course you can. Yeah, keep drilling, right? Keep drilling.
And
We're
on
on to
that note,
fracking now, bro.
can I get to the show?
Yeah.
Costin, I'll come to you because I want to understand what's happening in Europe here. Joseph Mann, our friend Joe Mann at the Washington Post, had a big scoop this week about the UK ordering Apple to let it spy on users' encrypted accounts. Security officials in the United Kingdom have demanded that Apple create a backdoor, allowing them to retrieve all the content any Apple user worldwide has uploaded to the cloud. People familiar with the matter told the Washington Post. What on earth are we talking about here, Costin?
This is kind of an interesting story because it's not an official story. I mean, it's not officially coming from the UK government. It's not officially coming from Apple because Apple are actually officially forbidden to disclose the fact, well, that allegedly the UK government is forcing them to build this backdoor.
So
So,
back up and explain. It's an undisclosed order, and it's a private, silent order that it isn't public. And Apple is,
no.
you're saying Apple is blocked from even discussing it?
I'm saying Apple is not allowed to mention it. So the first question that arises is who leaked it? Was it somebody in the UK government that leaked it? Was it somebody at Apple maybe that leaked the order? I would say that it's probably more likely that someone on the Apple side of things that leaked this document to Joe Mann. But what is, of course, the most interesting thing here is that, yeah, I mean, governments have been going after encryption and trying to force companies not to use encryption for a very long while. But it's always super interesting when this is done, behind doors, behind closed doors, in the shadows. And they're trying to put these gag orders on the companies so they cannot talk, they cannot warn people about them.
Juanito,
So
we just had this discussion on the podcast when the US government did this about face and say, hey, end-to-end encryption for everything after the typhoons hack. Now it's shifted entirely here, and it's actually an order. I mean, we haven't heard from Apple yet, and because, like Costin said, they probably are.
Because we fucking can't.
We
they
can't.
can't say.
But like, what's your read on this?
I think I'm extremely curious about how this leaks. Because I think this can
Why is that
mean...
relevant?
Well,
Why is the
so-
leak relevant? You both mentioned it.
Because I don't think... So first of all, like, there's a real politic that goes to some of these orders. And we've discussed it before about how, in this sort of like leadership vacuum that we have nowadays where nobody really in these like big corporations ever wants to like take a stand, what you get oftentimes is almost like a, hey, give me an excuse, right? Like, order me to do this, and that way I'm compelled to do whatever. And if somebody comes to us, we say, hey, look, legally we weren't allowed to talk about this, and like we have to comply with the law, and they told us that we needed to do this. Like, so this sucks, but sorry. However, like there's also the side of this where a country like the UK, as mighty as it might think it is, at least in its own head, it probably assumes that it isn't going to get compliance from Apple in something like this. And so you get there's a couple of different ways to interpret this, and it really rests on where did the story come from, which is, does it come from Apple? Which mean like, and somebody went out of their way, broke the law, and decided to like let Joe Men know. And kudos to Joe. I mean, this is an excellent story.
It was an A1 of the front page of the
Dude,
Washington Post,
nailed
so it's
it.
a big story. Yeah.
But like, if it comes from Apple, that means Apple actually feels like it's being pressured in some compelling way that they may not be able to effectively resist, or that they think some social scrutiny, some public scrutiny will improve. If it comes from the UK Gov side, then you're looking more at something like the San Bernardino situation, where they go, the UK knows that it probably can't strong arm Apple. So instead, it's it's forcing a public debate of some sort for a company that is extremely allergic to bad publicity, in the hopes
And
of
public debates.
and public debates in the hopes of reaching some kind of middle ground compromise, right? Like maybe the UK Gov doesn't actually think they can get them to give them access to everyone, but if they can come together on some handshake agreement that says, hey, if you come at me with a court order, or like, a warrant for this one person, then we will secretly give you their cloud backups, but nobody else's, right? Like, it's like hoping to have some kind of compromise. So it really depends. Like, the real politic of it is going to come down to who actually leaked the story, who's trying to put pressure on whom.
And according to the reporting costing, the government's undisclosed order, which was issued last month, requires blanket capability to view fully encrypted material, not merely assistance in cracking a specific account like the San Bernardino case, and has no known precedent in major democracies. Like, this is a significant deal, and how do you view it affecting the rest of the world?
Yeah, I think what makes this story special is the fact that the United Kingdom is actually demanding that Apple builds this kind of a backdoor which allows them to retrieve the contact of any Apple user worldwide. So it doesn't affect only the users in the United Kingdom. So initially I was thinking, yeah, like, okay, it will affect people in the UK, but no, what they actually want here. And to be honest, I'm wondering about the legality, like what is the legal framework behind this kind of requests, in which the government of some country, they demand that like a company such as Apple build a backdoor that essentially compromises everybody's encryption. So this would, let's say, if Trump or J.D. Vance or whoever in the United States use this advanced data protection for their iCloud accounts, for their iDevices, the UK government would theoretically have access to that. So to me, this is a huge issue. It's a huge problem. And again, I don't understand what is the legal framework that allows or could theoretically allow for something like this. And of course, the article says that Apple is more likely to simply stop offering this service in the UK.
Which is this encrypted iCloud storage, which is a very specific part, right?
A very specific part, which is again integrated in their advanced data protection plan for iCloud, which, by the way, for a while that was not available worldwide. That was available, I think, initially only in the United States. When I tried to enable it on my iPhone, it was not available in Romania, but later they rolled out this feature everywhere. So nowadays it is available. To my shame, I didn't enable it yet because, and by the way, this may be the case, not my problem alone, but maybe other people have the same problem, which is that they have other devices connected to their iCloud accounts, and those devices are incompatible. Just to give you an example, an Apple Watch 3 is incompatible with that. So if you have that device in your iCloud account, it will not be possible to turn on the advanced data encryption with this
they all need to be up
encryption
to a certain
version of iOS.
Yeah, that's true.
So it kind of forces you to buy like the latest hardware from Apple if you want this enabled on your account. So it will not simply just turn on for the new devices. It's either turned on for everything or nothing. So yeah, that could probably limit this
Why?
feature for some people.
Juanito, why are people putting things in Apple's clouds? Like, why not just turn it off completely? No iCloud connection like I do. Like, I have nothing connected to iCloud at all. I don't care. I don't need no storage. I don't need no encrypted backup. I don't need any of that stuff. Why do people use this? And do you use this advanced data protection for
I
iCloud? Like,
I use
explain
the
what it is.
advanced
Yeah.
data protection for iCloud. I mean, look, it has some really sensible defaults, like things like uh, so basically, why do you want to use it? Frankly, because some of the biggest benefits of being an Apple customer come from living in their ecosystem, right? So like, and it's little things that you don't think about, right? Like I walk past my HomePod and I'm listening to music on my iPhone and I can just like put my iPhone up to the speaker physically, and all of a sudden like it starts playing the music off of that speaker. It's ecosystem shit, right? But like that's what you talk about with like home automation and like wanting it to like control your lights and wanting it to do whatever, right? Like you want this sort of ecosystem stuff. And to be
And
fair,
that requires the iCloud being turned on and everything being
no, so
synced up
that I
all
mean,
together.
yeah, that requires like having a shared iCloud account. It requires, and like there's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes between iCloud connected devices that people don't necessarily know about. Like there's actually some kind of cool power features they do not discuss for some reason, where like for example, you could like SSH tunnel to any other iCloud device through Apple servers if you ever needed to, and just like as if they were on a local LAN, like stuff like that, kind of neat, right? The advanced protection stuff on iCloud, like sensible defaults, like I mentioned, right? Like you can't access my iCloud account from the web. You can only access it from an Apple device that's already in my iCloud, like whatever, stuff like that. Now, for the encrypted backup stuff, well, look, man, I'm glad you feel this comfortable with the stuff on your device, living just on your device. But considering that, like, you're walking around with a $1,500 piece of hardware that gets routinely stolen at clubs and other places, right? Like, the iCloud backups are just like, oh, the piece of hardware might as well be disposable, right? Because no one can access it, presumably, unless they have your fingerprint, your face, your passcode.
Can't you
So,
do local backups though? I mean,
yeah,
why
but
aren't we investing our
well,
energies into doing local backups instead of giving
because
these
that
things to the
that died with the iPhone, and frankly, sorry, with the iPod, and frankly, there's no way you're going to have the same, like even nowadays, think about it, like most devices are being charged probably by like wireless like key charging. So you're not really routinely connecting your device to your computer through an actual like data capable exchange. And people like, incremental backups are hard, and you're going to lose access to your shit. But there is something to be said. Like, look, I'll give you the alternative, right? With it all being encrypted and assuming that you trust the encryption and whatnot, and being end-to-end, um, there is an actual like nice like security posture thing to knowing that, fuck, bro, like I'll put the wrong passcode in 10 times and wipe this device and hand it to a fucking cop, and then go home and grab a different iPhone and restore from my iCloud backup up to that day, up to that hour probably, and move on. Like there is a security posture element to it where it's not all negative as long as you trust the way in which this shit is being backed up and where it's being put.
Do we
Mm.
think that Apple has complied? Like we haven't heard from Apple. Is it possible that Apple has already complied, either shut off this availability in the UK or has provided a backdoor? Because Apple in the past, when the FBI was asking for a backdoor, and there was this discussion and a debate over what is a backdoor and whether you can, Apple like put their foot down and said, we even we ourselves don't have access to it, and a backdoor for you is obviously a backdoor for everyone else. What do we know about what we don't know obviously about what Apple has done? Is there a chance that they've already given some sort of access?
Well, I think the question here, it's two completely different topics in my view. Whether you're complying with a court order or whatever the UK equivalent is of like, let's say like a FISA warrant, on a single individual. versus somebody coming in and saying, all right, bro, restructure this cloud bullshit. I need to be able to access everybody's stuff. And like it's a kind of like a funny overreach, because if the US government were doing this, part of what might justify their ability to ask this is that, let's say the majority of the data is housed in American data centers. It's extremely unlikely, if not completely implausible, that most of this data is being stored in UK data centers, right? So like if we're talking about their whole offering, right? You're talking about whatever cloud deployment, including whatever GDPR appropriate, like you need to store your shit in our tiny country kind of stuff. Um, so this is a ridiculous overreach, but it's interesting in that I think it's maybe playing into um, calling the bluff of some of these mega corporations, in that they do like to think of themselves as global companies beyond any particular jurisdiction, until the day somebody comes asking for something they're uncomfortable with. Then they're American companies, then they're like, going back to like, hey, somebody protect us, right? So not to be cynical about Apple, because I think Apple's on the right side of history on this one, right? Like, keep that shit encrypted, keep that shit you know secure, and of course don't just give blanket access to like asking for anyone's shit. But this is where you get into, I think the UK is pulling an FBI style overreach here. um, if they're s- if they're smart about it, they're overreaching with the hope of landing. You shot for the moon so that you can land on a nice cloud. No pun intended. But I don't know how this one's going to play out for them. Like, in that sense, as much as I love the UK, um, they clearly have been taking swings that you would take if you thought you were 10 feet tall, without realizing that like you are but a small country with no power whatsoever to dictate any of this shit, other than whatever like your market strength is. And unless the UK is willing to like play chicken with Apple and say no one can buy iPhones in the UK, which I don't think is going to fucking happen, then this is a weird negotiation, right? Like, this is a strange tactic to take on. And maybe, like the FBI, what they're going to find out is just how much worse the situation can get for them.
But Apple turning off advanced data protection for iCloud in the UK only is also a reality, right? I mean, you're
Yeah, it's plausible. And then I would remind you, like, that doesn't mean they're turning off iCloud backups. That means they're turning off this, like, advanced data protection presumably involves some level of encryption that is annoying the law enforcement in the UK. But I will remind you that people became much more aware of iCloud backups and just how much of an issue they were, due to a fuck ton of revenge porn incidents with these awful fucking incel
this
kids
is the reason I
in these.
turned it off in the first place and never turned it back on. What was it? The fappening.
can't-
Do you remember the
Yeah, it's
fappening?
like
It
the
was all
fapping
iCloud.
was
Yeah.
entirely powered by iCloud backups, and this kind of shit was the worst part. Is like the fappening is when we found out because some idiot like made a bigger deal of it. But it turns out that you had these forums full of these like antisocial boys, like basically sextorting some of their like school classmates based on we guessed your Apple password or whatever, fished it out of you, and then all of a sudden I can download a full backup of everything on your iPhone and just comb through for nudes and whatnot. And a lot of this was obviously like de facto CSAM and revenge porn and like all this awful shit. There was like a whole economy of these
Mm-hmm.
incels trading this material. And that is when I think the iCloud backup thing like gets the most popularity. It was on the basis of this kind of like garden variety abuse. So I don't know that it's like a desirable or cute thing to say, oh yeah, let's turn the web portal back on. Let's keep the iCloud backups unencrypted. Like, at best, what you hope for is that MFA is still enforced somehow. Because if it's not that, then I'll just, I can just kind of query those servers and pull your shit on the basis of what is probably like a 6-digit password.
Google has been offering encrypted backups for Android phones since 2018. Do we believe that they've also gotten this order? We haven't heard at all from Google. It feels like this would be a bigger target. Android devices are a lot more popular than iPhones around the world. Kostian, any thoughts
Well,
on, do we believe Google has an order as well?
The story does say that Google spokesman Ed Fernandez declined to say whether any government has sought a backdoor. To me, I mean, if nobody saw the backdoor, you say no, nobody saw it. But when you decline, it sounds like yet another of these gag
It's
orders.
confirmation.
Like it's
Well,
semi-confirmation,
did
if you
Apple
want.
confirm anything? Because what I
No,
would
they
ask, like
also declined.
yeah, I'm
Declined to
actually
say.
wondering if they legally can say anything. You know what I mean? Like if there's
Cannot.
like a legal liability to saying yes we have and no we haven't. Like that's
Mm,
actually, I mean, back in the day, that's why people had these like canary statements, right? Like you put
mm.
a statement on your website that says we have never complied with whatever, and
Then
then
you
the
remove
day
it.
that that changes, you remove the statement. It's like we didn't say shit. You cannot keep me from deleting a fucking line off my blog. And like that's why you had canary statements for a lot of these like privacy minded places. I don't know, right? Like I honestly I don't know what canary statement these companies could put forth because I'm sure they have all to some extent complied with some kind of law enforcement, request. And I think we want them to, right? Like to some extent you do want them to
Hmm.
under certain circumstances. The issue with this, look, everybody is at fault here. Everybody is at fault because I think since the Snowden revelations, what you got was this gritted teeth version of collaboration and cooperation, where it's what I mentioned earlier. It's like, hey, man, like, yeah, I can give you that data. Just send me a court order. So, if something happens, if something leaks, if you have an issue, then I can just say, oh, I was following orders. I was being compelled to do so. And frankly, I mean, I've always hated that mentality from the threat intel perspective because it is then used by overzealous corporate lawyers at mega companies to justify never sharing anything, even if it has basically zero downside potential. Like they feign liability and then they decide not to share shit. On the other hand, though, I think the governments have failed to properly create establish a mechanism of reasonable compliance wherein you could say, hey, this is what we expect from a company operating in our borders and offering products with it. And this is the protection that it will provide you to comply in this and that way. Um, and not having defined, like, nobody wanted to define rules of the road because they all wanted to see what they could get away with. And now they're not getting away with shit. The other people don't want to play ball. So instead, you start to make like knee jerk FBI dumbass decisions like, oh, give us everything. We're going to force you to give us everything. It's like, bro, this company has more cash than entire like Western European countries. Pick your fucking battles. Technologically, they can also bar themselves from having access to the information. Pick your fucking battles, right? You're telling me the only way to comply to this is like degrade the security of everyone in our country who uses these devices,
Including
including
yourself.
including yourself and your government officials and like Macron and everybody else, right? Like,
That's what
you know,
that's the bizarre nature of it is you're saying turn this shit off for everyone and you're exposing your own leadership, your own I don't
it,
know.
that's why I keep calling it FBI style dumbassery. It's like this desire for like a quick win where you don't mind blowing your own dick off if it means that you get a promotion, right?
And by the way, I think it's important to say why would anybody care about these encrypted backups? And there are, I think, two interesting sides to the story here. One is that um, recently a lot of new, let's say, new style hacking tools have appeared in order to bypass people's, who started using things like Signal, key-based, encrypted Telegram chats, encrypted WhatsApp. Like sometimes it's funny that even encrypted WhatsApp chats can pose a problems to the people who actually want to intercept these messages. So a lot of tools have appeared which actually, with access to a device, so let's say either by compromising it or through physical access, they get the iCloud access keys. And then from that moment on, if your Signal messages are being synchronized to the cloud, then you don't need like access to that device anymore. Like the device could be simply clean, updated to the latest version of iOS. The people will be monitoring your signal messages from the cloud,
Give
like
me some
without
examples
you
of what you're
even knowing.
talking about.
Dude,
Give me some.
we discussed this on the podcast before when we were talking about like NSO and some of these folks.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, why
Yeah.
would you like? So let me kind of restructure what I hear Kostin saying in a way that like is relevant, let's say, to the Paragon discussion or the
Well, we're
NSO
talking about
discussion.
Celebrite, Paragon. Like
Yeah.
these are the tools you're talking about,
But
Costin?
no,
Correct. Correct.
they're but think about this, right? NSO's business model. NSO is telling you you will get access to, let's say, this 10 itemized list of information for your target, right? So the Italians want Ryan's information. They go to NSO. They're paying NSO X amount of money. NSO's remit, let's say, is or their offering is essentially, hey, you will have Ryan's location, all of his pictures, his text messages, his WhatsApp stuff, like blah 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 blah, like cookies, like all this shit. This is like the style of the kind of information spec sheet that you can get from having our product. They currently have to do this kind of active collection thing where they need a expensive and easily burned zero click chain and not to persist on the device, and they need an implant, and they risk getting discovered, they risk exfiltration being seen, they need to have infrastructure along the way. Like there's all these ways in which that operation is very fraught, and you're offered like, the Italian government paid NSO, in this hypothetical, for a year contract worth of these deliverables, but your O days are getting burned every 2 weeks or every 2 months, and you need to scramble to find some other 0-day chain that complies with your requirements. That is super fucking complicated and perilous. It's fraud. It requires a lot of expertise. It requires a lot of money. It doesn't give you stability as a business. It's not like the ROI of your exploits is much lower. So if you are NSO or any of these companies, you sit there and you go, look, we told these people we would deliver these 10 things. If we if we target the cloud, then we only have to bypass Apple's security or Google's security. But getting the cloud backups and parsing them for information, hitting the APIs for some of these different services, spoofing certain connections and whatnot based on the stuff that we get, I can get, let's say, 8 out of the 10 deliverables without spooking the victim, without them being able to do any forensics whatsoever, because the only people who are in a position to determine this are the cloud regents, and they don't have much of like an incentive to really pay attention to this shit. So as NSO or as Paragon or as whomever, I can say, okay, this is a much more sustainable model. We can provide 8 out of the 10 things in our offering. How about this? I'll sell the Italian government a new cloud-based harvesting offering at 80% of the cost. And I no longer need to go look for 0 days. I no longer have to worry about Apple security engineering, changing shit on the device. I don't have to worry about figuring out how to collect data out of like WhatsApp's local store, then Telegram's local store, then iMessage's local store. Then there's all these ways in which it's actually a much easier business model. Maybe you can't get 100% of the same info that you could get, but these companies would be silly not to consider that offering. And frankly, I've heard that companies like NSO have already had offerings like this for a while. They just haven't really been discussed. So you get into, this is where you can see why I was ranting early on so heavily about like the lack of pressure, responsibility, regulatory, whatever, anything around what the cloud regents are required to do as far as like observing, protecting, paying attention to cloud, what's happening to cloud instances. And then subsequently, what requirement do they have to disclose to the victims of what's going on, right? Like right now, slightly off corollary, right? Gmail Tag is doing all this great protecting and they're finding all this shit. They tell you that you got hit by a nation state adversary as a favor because they fucking feel like it, and they don't give you any details, and you can go beg them and they're not going to give you the phishing email or any information about it. what are your rights as like a user? What are your rights as sure, I mean, maybe Europeans have some rights because that they tend to just kind of collect those. But for us, like, what are we, what do we do? And I think it speaks more to the fact that like there is no obligation on the part of these cloud service providers to give you shit. They can just do it if they feel like it. If there's like a cool guy, Billy feels nice, like he can help you out. But otherwise, like, what the fuck, man?
Apple Intelligence has been turned on by default on iOS 18.3. When you reboot your phone, Apple Intelligence gets turned on even if you've turned it off. It's becoming like Bluetooth. And I'm wondering if that my hackers, Conspiracy Ryan, is thinking private cloud
Let 'em
compute
cook.
is private cloud compute is the handoff that iPhone does when it doesn't have enough processing power to run the AI on your device. Does that come into scope as well when we talk about law enforcement wanting access to that stuff? I mean, I'm curious if you guys think like that becomes something even more problematic than your iCloud backups if you're doing, you're hoping to do AI processing on your locally.
It really depends on what's. Well, first of all, it's going to come down entirely to the implementation, and that's where the UK is playing with fire, the same way that the FBI played with fire, which is to say, like, look, I can give Apple shit all day long about their threat intel mentality, but their hardware, like security engineering, is literally second to none. They
Yeah,
are
but you're
the most.
turning on this Apple Intelligence shit that nobody wants. It's crap
I
and garbage. It diminishes my iPhone experience. You've added security complications to it, and then you have Juanito here praising them.
No, 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 no. I'm not. Look, I'm not praising Apple. What I am saying is you got to give them credit where credit is due. And there are things that Apple, like, you want to root for Apple in the AI fight. They're the only ones that have a genuine, heartfelt pressure to figure out how to give you a good, like, AI experience that is primarily on device. It's them and NVIDIA. And NVIDIA's doing that for like hardcore power users of AI shit who will pay $4,000 to have a little box on their desk that runs a local model. Apple has been gearing up for this fight for years. If you look at the way that they develop their chips and like all of this system on a chip shit about like having the neural engines have been around since like I want to say like the A7 or A8, like whatever processor from like 6 generations ago of iPhones. And the whole point was this foresight that we're going to need to be able to run some of this stuff on device. And that's why you can have, for example, search and feature tagging of pictures without it being a privacy violation.
Which has already been
It,
exploited, not exploited, but
abused.
used. The
It's
feature
been
was
abused.
abused by APT, right?
Yeah,
The
but
triangulation people. Yeah.
the same way that, I mean, but in that sense, like, they were abusing it the same way that anyone can abuse the local index that goes into you being able to search your files, right? But the whole point is I can have, I can go in there and search for license and find a picture of my driver's license without it needing to go to a server or needing to go to Google Drive and me putting all those pictures up there. So like, my point here is Apple is not perfect. Apple makes all kinds of mistakes. Apple like has this weird khaki wearing like milk toast monoculture in Cupertino where they have they feel that it's appropriate to be paternalistic about whether people can watch pornography on their devices. They feel that it's appropriate to be paternalistic about how you handle your notifications and
It's
your
not your
spending and
device.
whatnot.
In many ways,
It's
they
not,
think it's not your device.
well, they think that their view of their world is somehow more correct, and in some things I appreciate it. In some things I do not. In some things I think they can be very infantilizing, but where I do appreciate it is on the AI fight because they're the only well-resourced company that thinks it's important to have on-device AI shit.
But
It
is it even?
fucking sucks,
I
Ryan.
was
Like,
just
I
gonna say,
know it
does it?
sucks.
Okay,
Apple Intelligence is fucking terrible.
and
And
for
the
it to be
rollout
good,
has been atrocious.
for it to be
Like,
good, this private cloud compute has to work. They have to pass off. So I mean, that's what I think it sucks
well,
because
It
Go.
depends. It depends. So this is where I hope there's still some crafty motherfuckers at Apple, because I'll put it to you a different way. I'm surprised. Like OpenAI is seeing dollar signs when and data coming their way by this integration with Apple. And I think it's because they think Apple is kind of a harmless beast, that it will never really figure out AI the way that they want to. But let me put it to you a different way. Apple created this hypothetical, or supposedly, allegedly created this mechanism by which they are anonymizing what is the requests that are going to OpenAI. They're running them in these, like, sort of ephemeral instances on the cloud and whatnot. Um, have there been any discussions about whether Apple could distill OpenAI's models from all of these requests and create their own small language model for
Distillation.
onboard Dude, they could. You're creating a relay mechanism between hundreds of millions of users and their requests and OpenAI's responses. They would be fucking idiots not to find a way to leverage that data. Now, they may be the boys and Girl Scouts of the world, of San Francisco, of the Valley, the last remaining Boy Scouts, and really miss out on this opportunity. But if I were them, I would be looking to leverage OpenAI to improve this capability up until the point where I don't fucking need OpenAI at all, and we have good enough responses from Siri on device.
Austin, close the loop on this for me. What happens next? Where do you think this goes?
Well, first thing, I have Siri disabled on my device. So, like, I was thinking, what are you guys talking? What are you even talking about here? I disabled Siri a long time ago, and I realized it was listening to me saying, "Hey Siri," or whatever. And I still have it, to be honest, enabled on a few other devices in our home. So it's so funny, like from time to time, like randomly, you hear Siri saying like, "I'm sorry, I did not catch that," or like,
Yeah.
what's even going on here? But I think, yeah, private cloud compute probably it might be next. There's I think, a very strong similarity between this story and the FBI case with the San Bernardino shooter. And for people who don't remember, essentially the FBI wanted kind of to abuse their power back then, because Apple said that we can unlock this phone, and the FBI said, no, we don't need this. Well, actually, we need this phone unlocked, but we want the power to unlock any phone in the world. So I think there's a very good similarity to this story, that Apple, the UK government doesn't say we need access to these guys, to Juan's account. They say we want access to everybody's account. And it's for sure, I think it's a very outrageous overreach, if you ask me. It'll be interesting again to watch how the story develops now that it is public. And I still think, my opinion is that probably someone on the Apple side of things, they leaked the story in order to kind of steer a public discussion on this topic. And it's important to have a discussion. I mean, we need encryption, we need solid protection for our communications, and we need solid data encryption in iPhones, Android phones, and all mobile devices to protect them from, we know, like abusive governments, which there are many of them out there, when you travel, when you lose your phone, and from the bad guys.
It's funny how it's always terrorism cases that raises the reality that
Or child porn.
you don't own any of this stuff.
Yeah.
Look at the Tesla case with the exploding Cybertruck in Las Vegas. Tesla could remotely open the doors and track everything. It's not really your Cybertruck. It's
Dude,
like,
it wasn't even Tesla. It wasn't like they called Tesla TI, like Elon, right?
Yeah.
The CEO himself. Like, look, I think there's a lot of different people at fault in this. The UK is obviously overreaching. I wonder how much strategy there is to that. I hate to say that the FBI was slightly smarter, because you know how I feel about them, but they were slightly smarter in that they had a terrorism case to rally around. Like they thought this is our opportunity because there is a case that everyone can agree with. Because it's either like Kosten said, it's either child porn or terrorism, right? Like those are the inalienable. Like everyone agrees that we should be against this shit. There are not many last remaining bastions of decency where we all come together. But at least the FBI was trying to trade on that bullshit, and it didn't work for them. But you could at least argue that there was some thought going into it. The UK has not, as far as I know, brought up some kind of case that genuinely supports their suggestion that this is even necessary, right?
Do you believe something has happened in the background? There's been some kind of terrorism investigation
It
that is
doesn't have to
blocked
be
by.
terrorism. It's just like the reason I said everyone's kind of at fault here is I think the again, the governments have not provided what like a reasonable standard of compliance, like willing compliance should look like, and give these companies a mechanism. Like, for example, if the UK said, look, in order to be a tech company that provides services to UK citizens that includes, holding on to important data, you need to respond within 24 hours to any request that says, that is asking for X, Y, and Z and includes a warrant or whatever. And you will still have recourse to discussing it with a judge if you feel that it's an overreach. And there's this whole mechanism, right? Like we're saying this is what is okay to be a good digital citizen. Then I think it would be a little unreasonable of Apple, Microsoft, Google, et cetera, to say, no, fuck you. We decide what we do with our data. However, that doesn't exist. So instead, you get a lot of this sort of like overreaching and whatnot. And on the other hand, um, you also have that knee jerk reaction from these tech companies of saying, fuck you. I don't care about your little legal case. I don't care about your little investigation. I don't care about your national security requirements. I feel that if I give you an inch, you're going to take a foot. So I'm just never going to help you unless like I'm being strong armed and twisted into a pretzel. And like in this case, Apple is harder to come against because they're serving as a sort of bulwark of like privacy protection for their customers.
Which doesn't
But
exist, though, right? I mean, is there is an expectation of privacy using any device, Apple device? Is that a reality? I mean,
I
there is no privacy.
no. Wait, like let's not be extremist in the sense of like we're losing all nuance from this conversation. In a holistic sense, the notion of privacy in the 21st century as a digitally connected human being
It's
living in a
idealistic.
first and second world country, to me makes no fucking sense. Like I think it's like beyond the realm of wishful thinking. Like I expect Santa Claus to show up long before any notion that we have and that's why I've always like kind of scoffed and disagreed with our European friends in all of this like greenfield wishful thinking bullshit about privacy preservation. You're like, bro, it's not there to begin with. What are you preserving, right? At the same time, that the reason I don't like the fatalism is that if you tell me that Google and Apple are the same thing, even though Apple is jumping through 4,000 hoops and trying to invent new things just to keep your data in your device and out of their hands, then you're basically saying that there is no reward in this market for actually putting some effort into providing privacy. And therefore, you know what? Apple is wasting its time and money. Just be like Google, be like everybody else, hoover all the
It's
data,
still
make
a
us into
false
the
promise
product.
at the end of the day, though.
It's not a false promise as much as this is the same. It goes right back to the same threat modeling adage that we've always discussed in TI, right? Like the reason I hate, like I love James Mickens and I hope someday to actually get him to come speak at LabsCon. I've been trying to reach him. You and I have been trying to reach him for years.
If anybody knows anyone who knows
Yeah,
Professor
I would love to
Mickens,
talk to James Mickens
tell
or
him to check his email, please,
Shoshana
and look for my
Zuboff.
name.
Yeah, like
My
why
name
are
has
these
been in his
Harvard
email for
why
weeks.
are
Yeah.
these Harvard professors so hard to reach? So Shoshana Zuboff or James Mickens. But like, look, my point is, I don't like James Mickens' paper on like Mossad or not Mossad, mostly because A, it's a binary distinction, but B, even though I don't think it's what he intended, because his argument has quite a bit of nuance to it, it is usually used in order to fuel a fatalistic mentality that says, well, if an adversary wants to get to you, they will get to you no matter what. And I think
That's
that
false.
yes, it is absolutely false because we're saying an adversary. There is a whole set of stratification of adversaries.
But that's the paper about. It's either Mossad or meaning that adversary or every other adversary.
Yeah, but that's not how it was taken. Like I've had discussions with really high level security engineering people who make decisions for hundreds of millions of users who have told me that it's not worth tracking adversaries, it's not worth doing TI, it's not worth collecting telemetry because, you know, if Mossad wants to get you, if an APT wants to get you, they're going to get you. And it's like, no. Stop. Slow. First of all, you're not the intended audience for this paper. You are an ecosystem maintainer building the physics of what it means to try to defend people. B, there is a huge fucking difference between the Mossad and Vietnamese intelligence. There is a huge fucking difference between the Chinese MSS and, you know, the intelligence agency of Guatemala, right? Like and fuck
Fair.
and forget all APTs, right? There should be a huge fucking difference between what the GRU can do to you as an adversary and what a bunch of kids in the comm or a hacktivist group or, you know, a criminal group can do to you. And that's our game. That is why threat intel exists, and that is why, you know, I do not like the fatalism, because you're basically saying the fight has been lost already. There's no point in fighting at all. And I'm not coming at this in some idealistic perspective. It's just
You're sounding like that.
No. I am coming at this in an economic sense. I want it to be expensive to reach certain targets. I want it to be loud. I want it to not be easy. And the way you do that is to continue to raise that fucking bar. So yeah, you're an iPhone user. You are probably being tracked 10,000 different ways. There's cookies that are tracking you all over the place. Your telco has been hacked by the Chinese. They know where you are. Like, all of your services know where you are, what you're doing. However, that does not mean that we shouldn't try to have some privacy preservation design in endpoint devices, especially when you see how that data is being utilized all over and how it can be compelled out of the hands of certain companies.
Costin, is it fatalistic to constantly make the statement that at all times I assume there are 5 APTs sitting in my network?
I think it's good to say that from time to time, because people think it's only 5 while I already think it's 8. So it's important to be in a way to be deceptive.
Who's the other 3?
I don't know, but I would say that the number keeps increasing. Like, every year I have to worry about somebody else, like some new people or newcomers to the scene, not just the nation states, but cyber mercenaries, and then I don't know, some kind of script kiddies with a lot of money and too much time to spare. I was just thinking, like, listening to your conversation, that it's absolutely right that you need to increase the costs, and at the same time, I think the iPhone is a fantastic platform for everyday use that you can use to call your family, to call your friends, to do work, to do shopping, to pay. But if you have like something like, I don't know, super sensitive secret that you want to talk about, then you probably want to have another device, something like a Pixel running Graphene OS, which is completely untied, not tied to your identity. That means there's no credit cards associated to it, there's no email addresses with your name, there's nothing in there. And on that device, keep only whatever messenger you're using for your let's say, secret chats, and don't have just one of them. Have like half a dozen them,
You're
and
imposing cost on me, bro.
You're imposing costs on
I
me.
am. This is a reality. Like, if you want, well, this is a bit more than just privacy. Like, if you want privacy, just use an iPhone, right? And turn off Siri and the iCloud, and you'll be fine, probably.
And unplug the microphone and the camera and the signal, the antenna.
I was saying, by the way, there's an
Lockdown mode
entire.
exists because iPhone security sucks. I mean,
I fucking hate lockdown mode, and I'll never be able to turn it off, and I fucking hate it. Like,
Keep
there's
it
so
on,
many.
man.
I know, but
We
there's
feel
so
your
many.
suffering.
Stay
There's so
close
many
to that
little
mic. Stay
features.
close to that
Sorry,
microphone.
there's so many little features, so many like stupid little things that don't work, and it's
They
like,
break.
to me, it's so obvious that like someone at Apple couldn't be bothered, because there's other ways to like improve it, but because it's not a big enough population, they're like, look, man, we did you this favor, like, fuck off. I resent the shit out of it, but I will keep it on. All right.
And by the
Costin,
way,
finish your point about imposing cost.
I mean, again, this is what I kept recommending. There's journalists out there investigating corruption and writing about powerful leaders, and then they suddenly one day they find that they've been targeted, their devices were compromised, and to me the most funny thing is that they're surprised. I didn't imagine this could happen to me. Like, I feel violated. All my
Someone
data
wants
was
to know how
stolen.
Joe Mann got that leak, right? I mean, he becomes a target.
Yo, Joe Men.
Joe Man
Ship us that
should be
iPhone, bro.
like on the top, on the list of journalists that everybody wants to target. I think Joe Mann's name is somewhere there, like near the top, right?
We should be doing forensics on
Fucking
his
flex.
phone.
Oh, we
We
will.
Hey,
should.
listen.
With Lorenzo, with Joe Mann. I mean, yeah.
Hey, listen, the listeners said that our podcast should be 1 hour. We are at 50
Fuck
minutes
you.
yet.
I don't. These people don't know what they want. I do not care. They're not paying us. They will listen to as
Listen,
much of our
they
bullshit
didn't
as we want
specify
them to
the
listen
speed.
to.
They said 1 hour, but they didn't say which speed.
Just
Like in
3x
the
this,
the
edit
general
it.
relativity, the flow of time depends on the speed. So the faster we go, the longer the time.
Quickly, I got a note here to talk about Paragon quickly here, and it fits into this conversation. We briefly touched it last week when the story broke that WhatsApp was suing Paragon. We've determined on the pod in the real time, we said, oh, wow, this was the Israeli company that was sold to a US private equity company. And Juan, you raised a flag right away saying, hey, attitudes in the US may be changing around how we view these companies. Paragon came out and says, since last week to this week, Paragon came out and says, yes, the US government is a customer. And they've said they've allegedly cut off this Italian access to the platform after they've been reports that, journalists and activists was targeted. I want you to linger a little bit on the point you raised on the last show about these attitudes changing, the new administration, this thing, bringing it into the US gives you some sort of control over it, or maybe there's a legal framework around it.
Right.
What do you think happens with these mercenary hack for hire / surveillance spyware companies in the next year as we move forward?
I don't think anyone knows. And that's what happens just because, we are in chaos mode right now, right? Like, nobody knows what's going to happen, where, in what way, how, or why. So I don't think that it's a predictable thing, at least not in the United States. Now, what we discussed last time is this sort of notion of like getting more comfortable with, for lack of a better word, privateering and letting people have, I'm not going to say letters of marque or anything like that, because I think that was extremely idealistic, precisely because people thought that would somehow mean that we would get like people like Silas getting to play ball, rather than it becoming another way that like Raytheon is going to have business with the US government. And like the truth is that the very likely scenario is that one, right? It's not any of that, the more idealized situations. Now, I'm not talking about letters of marque. I am just talking about the willingness to outsource operations or effects. And there is a lot of excitement around that, particularly with this new job market, wherein like all the real talent is leaving the IC and the government, and what you have, you know,
That skill doesn't go away and they have to go find work, right?
well, they have to go find work. They have every reason. They've also been getting tragically fucking underpaid most of their careers. So you almost root for them to find good work because, why not? And then I think there's an argument to be made among all these folks that are disillusioned with government spending and how government makes its decisions that, hey, we weren't necessarily very efficient or effective in our use of cyber. Maybe if we had all these, private companies that actually have to fulfill these effects in some whatever fashion, then this is going to be a better situation. I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I don't know that I'm not for or against it as much as I'm mostly curious what's going to happen. But the reason I'm bringing it up in the context of Paragon is it's interesting to see them trying to signal that they are some kind of some more responsible actor. Like part of the issue with NSO was this kind of, Shalev Julio with all the like Israeli bluster, kind of looking people in the face and telling them to fuck off, right? Like, you don't like it, suck it. And you're like, dude, you didn't read the room very well, right? Like this is clearly like that wasn't the right sentiment, even with the White House at the time, where you start getting sort of the sanctioning. Not that necessarily was the best move. What did we see? Those companies left Israel, which is a relatively, friendly, law-abiding country that you can have conversations with, and they went to Saudi, the Emirates, and other places, and you're like, and Cyprus, and you're like, good luck, bro. Like, it's an internet offering. Like, what do you care? What do you think you did? With Paragon, I'm extremely curious just because of the ownership structure. You just brought it under an American company. They are going to feel this pressure. I don't know if the people who bought this were just kind of naive in thinking that this wasn't going to be problematic, or if they're playing 4D chess and they go, yeah, but if we show that we're cool and that you can have this capability from an American company rather than an Israeli or Emirati or Singaporean or whatever company, and the laws start, the sentiment starts to change around us, then all of a sudden Paragon is like the perfectly positioned privateer, mobile hacking company. And they can look Citizen Lab in the eye and say, hey guys, let us know of cases of abuse and we will review them the way that we have before. But now what you're talking about is them being more interested in tapping a massively expanded US hacking market rather than trying to take the pittance of getting a million here and a million there from every second and third world country out there.
The only reason we hear about this stuff is because Meta has filed lawsuits. I will remind you guys that the CEO of Meta is now a completely different person. Apple has already...
He's discovered bronzer and shit.
Apple has already withdrawn their lawsuit against NSO Group for some ridiculous reason. Conspiracy Ryan is going to predict that WhatsApp withdraw all these lawsuits as we move forward under this new administration. Meta's, cozying up to the new administration, Zuckerberg. I think that these lawsuits kind of go away and we never really get to hear about these things unless Citizen Lab comes out with a report. And Citizen Lab's reports are usually tied to a Meta report or an Apple report that kind of outlines this system. Do you think... Do you guys worry that as we move forward, this stuff becomes so normalized, we don't hear any of these stories and these companies just become part of our ecosystem?
I think I have always been worried about this, but it's not based on the politics and it's not based on the companies or the individual players or anything. The reason I will not stop banging on Apple and will continue to jump on them until my last fucking breath about verifiability is that this is the situation that we're trying to guard against. Apple doesn't need to have a canary statement on their horrible fucking blog. Like if there's something that this company can't seem to do is create a blog. They don't need a canary statement. They just need it to enable third-party observers, right? No country secures their elections, but this is a fucking contentious area to go into. But like when you want to secure elections in a contested place, you bring independent observers. You don't bring a particular, nobody really believes you when you just bring a company that says, oh, we looked at it and it looks fine. You're like, no. The whole point is you enable independent observers, and then you have a UN organization and a foreign, organization that probably is defunded by now, that says, "Hey, we watched this shit. We were there for the count. We looked at the systems. This was a fair election." And that's what Apple is missing in its infantilizing, paternalistic approach to threat intelligence, which is you don't need to be the most principled people in the room on your own all the time, fighting every fight by yourself, if you enable third party verification, just integrity checking, just telemetry, even if it's on a local level. You say, hey, like if you want like you cannot remotely go and collect all this information from the devices, but if somebody brings you this thing and you plug it in through this debug port with this particular cable, no, you can't edit anything on the device, but you can dump out like logs. You can dump out whatever. I don't, whatever it is. But my point being, if you enable Amnesty International and you enable Citizen Lab, you enable us as researchers to actually be paying attention to your backyard, we can verify and we can say, hey, things are working as intended. Hey, here's another threat. Here's another problem. And it bugs me because the attitude and what we get from Apple is almost this wish that these fucking people would just fuck off and leave us alone and stop telling us about these O-days and stop detailing these campaigns we want to pretend are not happening. And that,
or they're happening in small, tiny. I mean, Yvonne has made it very clear that this is just a tiny subset.
Everything is tiny. We don't know because we don't look, but we're dead sure it's very small. And you're like, bro, the fuck are you talking about?
It's the Mossad or not Mossad argument, right?
And that's my fucking problem with it. That is my problem with it. And I mean, you have already mentioned Yvonne. Yvonne is the person I've discussed these things with. And
we're talking about Yvonne Kirstich, who is head of Apple Security Engineering, right?
Yeah. I respect Yvonne immensely. I think Yvonne is a super smart dude. I just think his emphasis has been on security engineering on a hardware level. And it's been maybe, I won't say this is directly Yvonne's fault, but I will say Apple-wide, there is a really shitty attitude towards threat intelligence that is often coddled and sort of wrapped in this image of privacy. And again, this is where I have an ideological disagreement with Apple, which is I don't believe privacy exists de facto. We are not born private and then have that usurped from us. Privacy is something that you have to produce, protect, and monitor. And Apple has done a fair amount to try to produce privacy, but it is completely shirking its responsibility to monitor for it and allowing other people to monitor for it. Hell, allowing us to monitor Apple to make sure that they're doing what they say they're doing.
Yeah, but your threat intel industry hasn't really proven itself as threat intelligence folks anyway. It's just a bunch of marketing people looking to make money off of this inspectability and create fancy APT names with it's just your industry is so much it's hard to root for threat intel. That's the point I'm making.
You're describing a market and you're describing products.
This is what threat intel is though. That's what it has become.
Someone has to pay for expensive talent to use expensive systems to go through expensive data for the sake of telling you about expensive attacks. I'm sorry. If Apple, Google, and Microsoft want to throw a few $100 million into a pot to enable civil defense and then we can have it be an NGO, cool. But I don't see any of that shit happening. So it has to go through the market. And yes, you can resent everything that comes with the usual market dynamics. Marketing, bad product offerings, misaligned incentives, NDA, covered negligence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I am not saying the threat intel industry is great by any stretch of the imagination, and I'm right there with you on booing people who do it poorly. However, again, I think not accepting imperfect allies is a great way to end up with no friends at all. And that's something that, maybe the Democrats are starting to understand in the roughest possible way.
Costin, when we did the great exit interview on this podcast, you and I did an interview together. You mentioned talking directly to these developers at NSO and some of these spyware surveillance companies and saying, hey, be careful about like what you're actually building. It's not good for society. And you had this, I wouldn't call it a Costian, Mr. Costian wisdom speech. Do you feel like, and Juan mentioned this, all this NSA guys, CIA people getting fired, everyone taking these settlement claims. Do you think we're heading into a place where there are more paragons popping up everywhere around the US, everywhere? Or and how are you viewing this? Is there a European vision of this that is different from ours?
I think there are signs that there's a shift happening in the industry. I think there were a few people quite recently this week leaving Azimuth, if I'm not mistaken.
Two or three people announcing they're leaving Azimuth,
without, I think, any clear plan, or like at least no obvious announcement as to where they are going.
Is there a conspiracy cost in there?
Maybe.
No
Not me.
conspiracy. No conspiracy here.
But
Azimuth. Sorry, I'm just gonna say this bit, right? And I say this like being very straightforward about the fact that like I respect Azimuth for what they've done. I think it's actually one of the model companies that we should be looking at.
We should make it clear that we mentioned San Bernardino. The founder of Azimuth was associated with actually providing the FBI with access to that without putting the rest of us at risk, right?
In case of emergency, call Mark Dowd, right? Like that's sort of the break glass. But no, look, and we can talk about Azimuth in particular to the extent that I'm aware of what's going on there. Like, it's a company that stayed small, followed a certain ethical boundary of like only serving Five Eyes.
They got acquired by Trenchant, though.
Eventually was rewarded by getting acquired by fucking L3 Harris, right? Like, so hopefully they all made their money because they deserved it. And then those people have been in there for a while, and now you see Mark Dowd went and started a new company, and I think John McDonald's very, likely to go the same route, and I don't see why not, right? Like, I don't see it as, like, I don't see it conspiratorially. I see maybe, John's a smart dude. He's been in this business for a while. Maybe he's reading the tea leaves and seeing that there's opportunity for something new, because that's what I'm seeing with a lot of this talent. There's a perception that, like, yeah, shit sucks in the gov and it's no longer worth it from you're not selling anybody on an ideology, right? You're not saying, hey, like, stay and defend your country.
Stop ruining our conspiracies.
Fuck your conspiracies. I'm much more interested in the realities are stranger, right? The realities are more concerned, because now the important thing here is, if we're resting on our laurels as quote unquote thought leaders, fucking disgusting term, then it's very easy to keep parroting the same lines we have been for the past 10 years and not realize that the ground is shifting beneath our feet. The whole point of working at the gov and like Rob Joyce looking you in the face and saying, hey, buddy, stop smoking weed and come do some cool shit at the fort that you can't do anywhere else. That argument doesn't mean shit when we now have created like a whole market for these like government sanctioned mercenary groups that can go and do effects-based operations and like soup to nuts collection operations. It's like, okay, you're telling me I don't need to go get piss tested every day and have somebody walk me to the bathroom, and like I can't bring my phone into the office. Like, I can just go fucking work at a cubicle farm in Arlington, and like that's good enough, and I get to do the cool shit we were talking about, and they're probably gonna pay me the money that I'm actually worth. Fuck you. Like, yeah, that sounds phenomenal.
I want to hear the finish the Costin's thoughts about people leaving. And,
I'm gonna mute myself here, so I stop interrupting.
No. He was. I suspect he was making a point about like availability of talent and people moving around. And the question to you was, go ahead.
No, just saying that there are signs that there's a wind of change and there's new opportunities for the people who are typically involved in offensive operations. And I was thinking that if I were to be thinking strategically about, let's say, the whole issue of WhatsApp catching something, then exposing it or suing the company, and then maybe Citizen Lab catching another thing, that's another day, another NSO operation, I don't know, there's another day, and there's another whatever operation going on. The solution maybe to this issue of being constantly caught, just imagine if instead of maybe let's say a dozen or 2 dozen 3 dozen different companies like NSO, there were 1,000. I mean, 1,000 companies doing offensive stuff. And then just think who will be able to keep track like of all the stories. And just imagine like the WhatsApp lawyers trying to open 1,000 cases, or of Citizen Lab trying to publish 1,000 blogs about all these different companies. So like one of the solutions, like strategically, if I were thinking about that, is just to create 1,000 different offensive security companies who develop
The
tools,
VCs are
develop
lining
malware.
up.
Yeah, just create 1,000, and the moment 1,000 such companies are active at the same time, if there's of course enough money, enough funding, automation with AI, you don't need to hire 50 people, automate everything with AI. Then it's a nightmare just to keep track of all these 1,000 companies and what they're up to. And like, yeah, good luck suing them. Like
It's
you
not a
see one of
conspiracy
them,
to see.
oh, just
It's not.
shut down.
It's not entirely conspiracy thinking to see this heading in that direction. I know
It
Juan probably
is.
disagrees.
It is going there.
It is. I don't think it's a conspiracy. That's my point. It's not a conspiracy at all. It's just a market, and like it's a market that's been artificially depressed and disincentivized within the U.S. by virtue of this overcautious militaristic mentality about CNO and the notion that like cyber operations, like look at all of the hullabaloo around the fact that like the previous Trump administration changed the chain of approvals for cyber operations. And like then came the Biden administration and you had people like Ann and others like complaining, looking to like how do we reverse this so that you go right back to having fucking 7 organizations along the way, all the way to the president having to say yes, just so like some fucking kid in Fort Meade can just like hit enter and like Cobalt Strike pops up somewhere, right? Like it was always ridiculous. Like it was that's why I kept saying like America is like like this roided out sitting duck. Where like you have all this capabilities and you won't like lift a finger to defend yourself. And that kind of regulation, that notion that like this is such exalted Title 10, Title whatever capabilities that no one can possibly do this unless they're in the gov, it meant that you had this kind of artificially depressed offering where the only people who would be trying to offer offensive capabilities to the government were companies that were looking to get acquired by Raytheon and have all been acquired by Raytheon recently, or small boutique shops that might be a subprime offering to the government, and none of them own the operations end to end. None of them own the operations for outcomes. The outcomes were still being determined from within these shops. And I think a point that I want to make with regard to like the 1,000 companies problem, how many are already out there? Like, let's not forget that like hearing about these
Hundreds.
big blustering companies is an outlier. Like NSO's biggest problem really was this sort of bracenness about like having someone like Julio coming out and like spitting in the faces of the Citizen Lab people and trying to like lie his way into having better like publicity, and somehow that was going to make things better, where like you're forgetting that by virtue of having any public presence whatsoever, you have just shown yourself to be a bad government contractor. Because if you're working with the IC, your sole job is to shut the fuck up. Your first, second, and third jobs are to shut the fuck up. And the fact that like you're on CNN means you're already fucking so far over your skis that you're never going to recover from that perception, the same way Hacking Team never recovered from their radical transparency push.
Speaking of radical transparency, we just got the first ever report from the Intel community with the US Gov actually disclosing 39 zero-day vulnerabilities to the public, to vendors and to the public to be patched rather than to be kept. These vulnerabilities, equities process. 10 of these, the government kept for themselves unknown for a number of years before to exploit before disclosing it. It's kind of like the first time we've actually gotten numbers from them. It's a significant thing, Costin. Does this matter that we know now that they've turned in 39 0 days and they kept 10 for a while before they turned it in? Isn't this what agencies are supposed to do?
Well, I think it's a great story. I read Kim Zetter's article, so you can. By the way, I noticed that Kim Zetter has a new website. She doesn't write on Substack now. She has her own website. Did you notice that?
I did not.
I think it's a Zetter
Zetter-0day.com.
So yeah, shout out to Kim Zetter and her new website.
She mentioned she was migrating out of Substack. I just never knew
she
what
needs to send her phone to us for forensics as well. But go ahead, Costin.
Which phone?
Look.
Last time I saw Kim Zetter, she had like this super old. Do you remember?
She used to walk around with a tape recorder with a cassette inside.
Correct. So she is like super careful with these things. But yeah, I mean, about the story, going back to the story, do you remember like how many times did we see those Apple security bulletins where they were saying yeah, we want to thank an anonymous submitter for reporting this 0 day that may have been massively exploited, but we don't know because it was a reporter who was exploiting it. So now we know who it was, or at least now we know who some of those were. And I think, yeah, it's interesting to me.
I just mentioned Microsoft actually actively credits the NSA sometimes, right, Juan?
The NSA.
I think they have. I think they have, but I don't remember.
But isn't this VEP coming out of the NSA?
Well, I think what they're saying, kind of funnily enough, is that NSA were the only ones taking it seriously. And apparently a lot of... So I think that's kind of funny, right? Like if you read some of the... So first of all, I think the numbers seem pretty paltry.
That was my first take. My first take was like, this sounds very, very tiny.
The numbers sound pretty paltry. It also kind of sounds like... I'm not going to say it was toothless, but look, American agencies are actually surprisingly anal about complying, especially like executive agencies, right? Like I know people think that...
Used to be.
Well, I know people think that in these late United States that that it's like a free-for-all and everyone's like doing the same kind of like abuses or whatever. I actually think we've been kind of freezing into like calcifying into this like overly cemented, overly bureaucratized place where like nobody could make any decisions or do anything. It's sort of like the exact opposite of what we're describing. But usually these organizations like really go like jump through hoops to go and comply with whatever the White House is telling them to do. And like these are a lot of them executive agencies, right? So if you tell me that we've been told how great this VEP process was this whole time, but it didn't actually include any kind of reporting requirements or like actually bringing these organizations to heel and saying, hey, fucking stop, right? Like, what are you using? What have you got? It just kind of, I kind of feel a little bait and switched with the notion of like the VEP and like and I will defer to Katie Masuris and Dave Eitel and their expertise of this. I am not familiar enough with the process. I just think the numbers sound pretty fucking paltry to talk about like 39 whatever. And frankly, why? Like why is the US government doing this? Should they be doing this? Beyond like a common sense requirement, right? Like the Chinese aren't popping up with like reporting whatever vuln they just so happen to have in their stockpile. I think the hope here was that we would get overly powerful, overly like ecosystem destabilizing vulnerabilities to get reported. Like Eternal Bue, right? Like Eternal Bue was one that should have been reported much earlier on. Like I think that is like the original mistake.
What do you think the threshold is for giving it up?
I mean, look, wormable exploit to me is a pretty well, I say that, right? The U.S. and Israelis have previously taken advantage of wormable exploits to great success, and
Hmm.
then to notable failures as well with Stuxnet. But there is a need for that kind of thing. At the same time, um, eh, I think the
You're
assessment
exposing
has to.
yourself, right? Like someone sits there and says, hey, if we don't give this up, our own network is at risk because, I mean, we're not the only
So
people capable of finding and exploiting this.
and that's the real issue though, and this is where I don't think it's clear cut, and I would like to hear from like Katie and Dave after a couple of drinks, where we sit down and go, okay, let's be completely honest. Is it more likely to improve our collective defense, or are you setting the starting gun off by letting people patch diff their way to an extremely powerful end day when there isn't necessarily going to be that patch adoption? Like that's the thing with, like, let's look at Eternal Bue. Let's assume let's create this. I think this is anachronistic, but like let's create this thought experiment.
Remind the newer listeners what Eternal Bue
Yeah.
is very quickly.
So Eternal Bue was this wormable exploit that was actually released with the Shadow Brokers Trove when things leaked out of sort of this NSA tooling. Um, and it's what fueled things like WannaCry, because like it's, the North Koreans get their hands on Eternal Bue, they bake it into WannaCry, which Great had already seen. I want to say it was Kurt Baumgartner had already seen that WannaCry ransomware being selectively utilized in North Korean operations, but not being wormably deployed quite in that way. The North Koreans deploy this shit, and within like a day or two, have basically like bricked half of the planet because of how powerful this SMB exploit is. And it's like a family of exploits, like Eternal Bue, Eternal Romance. There's a couple of different, things, but they're basically used as spreading mechanisms. I think
And the
the
US
issue.
government had it in hand for a long time before.
The US government had it in hand for a long time. Who knows for how long? Now, what I will say is, it was already weaponized. It was in their hands, in their stockpile. We never had seen it before, which goes to show that there is such a thing as the responsible use of these wormable exploits in the hands of careful enough operators, which seems to just be like the Five Eyes folks.
Or people who catch it and doesn't disclose.
No. In this case, by definition, if they fucked up, we would all know. Right? Like that's the whole point of a wormable exploit like Eternal Bue. That's what the North Koreans weren't setting off to infect the entire planet with WannaCry. It was a failed operation for all intents and purposes. It may have had some benefits of more people finding out about North Korea and thinking they're 10 feet tall, but I don't think that was their goal, right? And they didn't make much money off of WannaCry. It was a fucking shit show. But if that exploit was ever used, presumably that exploit has been used before and we never saw it, which means that like whatever sensible controls people within NSA would put around the use of this exploit are sensible enough that this thing didn't like leak out everywhere. Now, the issue with an exploit like that, you can say in the hands of these super responsible big boys at the fort, is not that dangerous. But clearly, in the hands of anybody else, it is a global pandemic on the cyber side of things. And then the question I would ask is, if NSA had this conversation, if they went to the presumably the VP process existed at the time, whatever, and they said, look, we have this exploit that could basically like brick their way through the planet on all these Windows devices. And they're willing to report it. They're willing to take it out of their stockpile and give it away. Would it have been a good thing for Microsoft to put that in a patch? Or would that have set off that pandemic? Because, I mean, look, patch Tuesday, exploit Wednesday, right? Like,
you're
how
going
many
into a dark,
people...
dark place there, though, where you're saying you're heading in a very dark direction where you're saying, hey, this thing is too bad not even to disclose to the vendor itself.
My point here is, I think those are the real conversations the big boys are having. And there's a whole lot of clucking and bitching on these like Mickey Mouse version of the problem where we all go, wouldn't it be nice if we all just work together and then, we just put patches and everyone patches everything perfectly. And you're like, that's not how any of this shit works. That's not how this world works. So, and I think that lends the fact that we don't have mature enough public discourse about these things lends to that disconnect with the IC, where the people who are living in those skiffs and making some of those decisions go, these fucking people aren't even, they don't know what they're talking about. They don't know what they're asking for. And there is a point. Like, if we aren't sitting down here going, hey, if Hal Martin hadn't done us the favor of giving us Eternal Bue, would somebody
What? Wait, what?
so I
Now
wanted to
this
see if you
is
were paying.
conspiracy,
I
Juan.
wanted to see if you were paying attention. So if the shadow brokers hadn't
That's like
given us
saying
this,
if Jesus didn't give us the fire,
well, yeah, but seriously, like if we hadn't gotten it from the shadow
I would ask who
brokers,
Hal Martin is, but I'm not
Yeah.
going to.
but allow me just to interrupt you for a moment and say I think it's important to the whole discussion that at least in two separate occasions, exploits 0 days from that family that you mentioned, one were captured by Chinese APTs. Don't forget the Symantec blog post
Bemstore.
on Bemstore.
Yeah.
And there's another amazing blog post from Checkpoint about another case when exploits against 0 days were captured by Chinese APTs and used
Yeah.
against other targets, not
Yeah.
massively, not worm style, but still used. So that I think
It's
is a
always that
proof.
risk is, yeah.
That's a proof that 0 days used by whoever, they're being captured by other threat actors, and they can be used against you.
Yeah, there's a reason territorial dispute exists.
Oh, go Teddy. I think that's actually kind of funny. And again, that's a different glimpse at the same power competition that we're trying to butt our way into, right? Like, Kostin, Equation Group release, you put forth like the replay of the Aurora exploit. So the US is doing the same thing to the Chinese. Thank you for the exploit. Let me replay that right back at you in our own operations. And frankly, like, it's got to be actually a really nice thing for them, because that is an exploit where you don't have to sit around and have an equities process discussion at all. You're not burning anything of your own. This is something somebody flung at us from over there. What's the problem with sending it right back? It actually cuts through a lot of bureaucracy. On the part of the Chinese, this goes back to all of our discussions about, like, well, why aren't they sharing their threat intel? It's like, well, they're fucking weaponizing it right back at us, and that seems to have a much greater return on investment than writing a fucking blog that nobody's going to read. So, they have a point. But I just want to, like, I do want to stick to this point about how, like, infantile the public discussion around VEP and vulnerability equities processes. An equities process is an important issue within intelligence, and it's something that happens regularly, perhaps on an even daily basis, if not, maybe not in that name, but in discussion. Because you're saying, these are our equities at play. We have a guy who sits next to Ivan Kristic embedded at Apple, right? We could today decide that we want him to go and push a code commit that will make this change that
Do
the
they
UK
have
is
this?
asking for. No. But
This is
just
conspiracy Juan.
no. I'm trying to describe a hypothetical equities discussion within intelligence. Let's say the UK has a dude that's sitting next to Ivan who has, like, the ability to code commit and could change this whole product offering to not be a good end-to-end encrypted implementation. The equities discussion goes, well, what is our gain loss with this? What will we gain if we try to unilaterally sneak this patch in versus what will we lose if we lose the only asset we have that sits next to Ivan, who has visibility over what Apple's doing, who will be really hard. It will be very hard for us to get another person positioned that way who works for us or works with us, and we will spook the company into being much more careful about insider threats and potential collaborators. that is your gain loss discussion. What do we gain? Well, maybe we gain visibility over every single, iCloud backup. Maybe, but maybe not. Or maybe we gain it, but we only gain it for 15 minutes until somebody doing a code review goes, "What the fuck is this?" And then they fire that guy. That is inequities discussion. So when we talk about, maybe a human asset is obviously much more valued and precarious than a vulnerability. But there has to be a similarly mature discussion where you go, hey, are we going to cause more damage by patching this than if we just shut the fuck up and hope that no one ever finds it? And look, no one had found it. Eternal Bue was in Windows XP implementations of the network, and no one ever that we know of independently discovered and used it. So
and I'm sure they have a ton. I'm sure they have a ton in stockpile now that fits that bill, right? I mean,
they have a ton of this shit. But how do you look at them in good faith and say, you need to tell us now? And you go, you guys can't patch shit. None of you deploy patches. Why would we tell you that there's a super spreader vulnerability if you people aren't going to actually deploy the fix? You're better off with us just shutting the fuck up and hoping that this never comes around.
Costin, what value is this 39 days were reported last year to us? What is it significant that it's 39 and not 139? What are we learning here? What is the value to us that we learned this?
Well, to me, what would be interesting here is that if we knew exactly which ones they were, 39, but which CVEs more specifically, because then people, could go back and try to see when those were getting exploited. Also for mobile stuff, it's quite difficult. To me, I don't know, maybe you seem a bit negativistic here, but to me, this is a win. I mean, look, they disclosed 39 0 days and those got patched. I'm happy. For me, this is a positive thing. I mean, you need to send some kind of a positive message so the people who are pushing for these programs, they have some kind of justification to do more next year. So remember, this was just 2023. There was one point which one said which got me thinking, and I was worrying about that because you were talking about what if we disclose this super dangerous 0 day and then the vendor patches it and people reverse the patch and it's chaos everywhere. And I was thinking that the conspiracy Costin talking back in the days we were facing some situations when, let's say, somebody discovers an interesting thing and we say, we need to do a silent for this interesting thing, but we can't afford to do the silent because the other guys are watching our silence. So then they'll figure out that we caught their stuff. So in that case, we'll do a wider silent, which catches a lot of other stuff, including this thingy, but it's not targeted at just that single thingy out there.
So there's silence and then there is silence.
Well, so in other cases, asymmetry in silence.
In other cases, we were no, we're not going to do a silence. Instead, we'll do Yara rule and we run it locally. We try to harvest everything and we match it against the Yara rule because the other guys are watching the silence. So just saying that this kind of thinking happens in every security company out there. Every single company, they have people who do the silence and they have, let's say, pretty much the same mentality and problems. But like I was saying, we do a wider net in order not to tip the bad guys. You can apply the same concept to patches. So we know exactly where this vulnerability exists in Samba. So we know exactly how to patch it, but if we patch it, others will reverse it. So then we'll do something else. We'll say, we are gonna rewrite this part of Samba in Rust. So it just happens that this is gonna kill this entire class of vulnerabilities that we know about, but we can't say that we know about. So we'll pretend that we don't
just
know
apply
about.
the patch, right?
And at the same time, we'll close all those. So it's doable. I think it's doable.
Interesting.
Maybe not with Rust, but with other methods. But
with a certain level of collaboration, right? And I think that's precisely where
the guy sitting next to Ivan and say, Ivan, we need to use Rust. Oh, okay.
I mean, that's a subtle, I like that sort of subtle influence campaign approach to it. But I think it's necessary because I know some folks have this weird faith that like the government and the private sector have like been collaborating really well, and like you have these people who just kind of sit in the right rooms, and some of them do, but I just don't think that they're getting to play and properly collaborate the way we expect them to, or that we would even recognize as a good faith attempt to do so. And this is an example of why I like harp on that so much, because if I in the IC knew that raising the flag with Microsoft would mean that like we would all get in a room together and have a serious strategy discussion about how we're going to handle this, and like
You don't think these things happen?
They do.
I'm sure they
Thank you,
do.
Costin.
They do, but I don't know that they happen so reliably that I would show my cards that way. Like if I knew that I could sit down and be like, yo, you've got like a massive problem in this part, but if we tell you about it and you just patch that little thing, like this is going to set the whole fucking planet on fire. And I knew that, you're going to go, don't worry about it, bro. Like Dave Weston's going to be on it. He's going to do it right. It's not going to be some random bullshit like MSRCPM who's going to fuck this up. Then I just would expect that this would be happening more. But I don't know, man. Like, is that really the case? Like, which is to say, Microsoft is also not masters of the universe, right? Like, look at something like Hafnium. Okay, they could have force patched all the Microsoft Exchange servers. They didn't do it. They kind of refused to do it. And then even once you had Hafnium exploitation being spread to like, which is really proxy logon exploitation being spread to like every other threat actor under the face of the earth, you still had people who didn't deploy any kind of patch and didn't do any kind of fixing. Like that kind of unevenness, that kind of, well, we did our job, right? Like we did our job. If everybody else doesn't bother to, at least our conscience is clean. Like, I don't think that applies when you're the one opening Pandora's box. Like, when you're the one with the exploit and you go, look, man, we have, like, I don't know what kind of studies exist at NSA, but if anyone is in a position to have authoritative studies about parallel discovery of zero-day vulnerabilities, it's the people at NSA. And I don't know what their internal metrics look like to say, actually, we have, let's say, NSA has had over the lifespan of hacking at the fort, which is since like 1994 or something like that, according to Craig Weiner's thesis. Like, in that time, we have seen 2 million vulnerabilities of different types of potential impact. And in our experience, between what gets offered in the black market, what we see from other threat actors, what we see from our partner agencies, and what we see from OSINT investigations, only 4% of these vulnerabilities are ever parallel discovered, with some margin of error of like, 2 to 3%. Then the argument that like we absolutely need to disclose every high-powered vuln actually doesn't stand up to muster. If that is the case with it's not perfect information, but with the visibility that you have as an org like NSA, then we must sound really fucking naive arguing with them, saying you need to tell us what you know because that's going to make the world better. And they're sitting there going, no, it fucking won't. And we have the math to prove it.
Kim Zetter referenced a 2017 RAND study that found in the case of one set of vulnerabilities made available to the US government by a third-party seller, the vulnerabilities generally lasted 7 or more years before someone disclosed the vulnerability to the software maker to be patched. Do we believe those numbers? Does that sound kind of like in line with what we expect, how we expect these things are being handled?
Well, I believe it because if they buy a vulnerability from somewhere else, and depending on the case, they might not be allowed to disclose it. So,
but then someone else has knowledge of.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a vulnerability they say they discovered themselves, then there can be a timeline and there can be a set of conditions, and we'll disclose it because it's our own discovery. But when you buy it from someone else, there might be a license agreement, like yeah, I can use it, but I'm not allowed to disclose it, and it's in the license agreement, so that could
Almost
explain it.
certainly. I mean, if you look at the structure of, I mean, at least what the rumor mill, right? Like the structure of payments for 0 days to third parties, it's
Mm.
not like a lump. It's not like they're just cutting you a check and everybody walks away. Because then what keeps, like, look, if I buy a 0 day from Ryan and Ryan wants $500,000 for the 0 day, if I just pay him $500,000, he gives me the O day, we both walk away. What stops Ryan from selling it to somebody else? What stops Ryan from
Happens.
To
disclosing
report
it
it.
to Apple
Yeah,
himself?
and
Right?
get the
He
money
already
from
got his
Apple.
he got his money and he gets to
Triple
have his
dipping,
clean
yeah.
conscience that
Mhm.
Sounds
everything
like
is
something
hey,
Ryan would do.
right. So it's like so that's not what the payment structure looks like, right? In any smart, you know, you want this kind of long tail of a services offering. So you go, hey, Ryan, I know you want 500. I'm going to give you 200, and then I'm going to pay you 20 grand a month for as long as the exploit works, up
You think
until
that happens? Do you think this is
5 years.
Yeah,
part of
100%.
Almost certain.
Really?
Yeah.
Almost certain, because otherwise you have no mechanism of compliance for like what you're getting from these people. And it also means, like, dude, what about ROI? What happens if I do buy it from you, and not because of anything you did, but Apple patches that shit next
Mm.
month,
Anyway, yeah.
and I
Yeah.
paid you $500,000 and I have nothing to show for it, right? Like there has to be some way wherein, like, you're kind of proving out the ROI of what you're buying. And that's just to say that would be the same kind of contractual agreement that I would expect them to use to justify the, like, sorry, bro, this is not ours to disclose. It's just ours to use, right?
All right. Speaking of 0 days, our favorite US government agency, CISA, is continuing to be active on the KEV front, this known exploited vulnerabilities catalog that they maintain. In addition to a handful of stuff that they've done over the last week, I believe there was about 4 or 5 new ODs added to KEV this week. There's one that just dropped last night about a Trimble City Works server OD that's being exploited, apparently reported to them by the Semantic Threat Hunter team, part of Broadcom, whatever the fuck that means.
Broadcom bought Semantic.
A very odd thing, CISA has added CVE 2025-0994 to KEV based on evidence of active exploitation, strongly encouraging users to search for IOCs and apply, go hunting, and so on. And they provided a link to this Trimble. I assume that's the company. Quickly, Costin, what do we know about Trimble? And have you read this report? Is there good IOCs? Is this quality work from CISA that provides an idea that they're still active as a government cybersecurity agency?
Well, first of all, I admit I haven't heard of Trimble before today, or
I had
was
not
it?
heard of SolarWinds before that day as well.
Fair
Is this
enough.
one of them?
Yeah, but maybe we're like not the target for the software coming or the services coming out from these vendors, or maybe it's just like another name for one SolarWinds like tool set or suite of programs. But yeah, nevertheless, I did look at. I find this a very funny story. We discussed it a bit before the podcast. The first thing being that you say there's a CISA alert. You go to the CISA, and the CISA page is actually just a link to Trimble. So there's nothing useful on the CISA website, but it does kind of bait you into clicking the link under the promise of IOX. Yeah. So I did that. You click that and then you go to like the most weird I don't know what this is, some kind of JavaScript content management system that renders a PDF in some kind of a viewer with buttons on the left and right, which is like surreal, and you can't select and copy paste, but you could, like with the mouse you can drag the images
Bro,
left and right.
this is what it takes to
What?
be able to look at Trimble confidential documents, which is still what this thing is labeled.
It's
It is
marked
labeled
as a confidential document with IOCs.
Trimble confidential.
Yeah, and Juan actually said like, look, there's an icon like in the left upper corner, which looks like an Adobe like thingy, curly thingy. And when you click on that, you get the PDF. And I was like, why don't you just link to the PDF?
I cannot wait for the
can't understand.
report on the vulnerabilities on the Trimble PDF viewer.
Oh, God. Just don't.
No, but this Costin makes a great point. Like, why does CISA throw people through these dumb, crazy hoops when there is a PDF? There is a PDF to link to. Or why not just copy the IOCs and put it into a CISA advisory? Like, what are we doing?
It's all kind of phoning it in, bro. Like the big thing here is look at how much discovery we and ChatGPT need to do in order to understand what the fuck this is about. And like that's the thing that's always been missing. I know that this is a hard ask for a government organization in the US because the UK seems to do it just fucking fine. But where is the editorial part of it? Where is the assessment of why this fucking matters? And that's the problem with CISA's disclosures. They want to make everything look like the biggest fucking trash fire of all time so that their blog seems important, rather than being able to release programmatic things like this and saying, hey, there is this thing called CityWorks server. None of you are probably using it, but a lot of government organizations, public sector, utility companies, etc., use this for like workflow management and, asset lifecycle management. And for those people, they need to be aware that there's this important vulnerability that's going to get those IIS servers fucking popped, and they need to update now, or the problems they face are this, that, and the other. That is what I wanted to see in the CISA part of this, and then they can just point to, hey, go talk to your fucking vendor. It's not our job to fix this thing. It's their job to fix it. We're just letting you know. What's missing is the assessment. Like Trimble, blah, blah, blah. You're like, well, fuck, I hope these customers of Trimble are so plugged in and so top of mind aware of what this tool is that they will recognize that that is what they have, what they're using, what they need to update. But why is this necessary? Like, how fucking hard is it to Google for some of this shit? And like, or even you clearly had discussions with the manufacturer. How about just having a top line assessment like, hey, these are our discussions with them. This is what the timeline looked like. This is why it matters and to whom it matters and to what level it should matter. It's the same conversation that we had about these fucking, what was it, like the vulnerability in these hospital things from last week or 2 weeks ago. And it's like the vital sign measurement machines. I can't remember what they're called.
Comtech last week.
Yeah. It's like it's similar to the discussion we had then, where you go, you're putting this alarmist thing out there and you're not helping people determine what the order of priorities is, what their actual options are, what like a good way to mitigate this problem would be.
You obfuscate the most important thing that you could give people.
Yeah. You all you're saying is fire, and then you walk away and you go, oh wow, people got trampled leaving that theater. You go, what happened? What was the fire? It's like, oh no, someone lit a match and put it out, and you're like, wow, thank you. Thanks.
Costin, anything to Symantec Threat Hunter team reporting this? Does this automatically set off nation-state alarms in your mind that this is something significant that U.S. city government agencies and so on, whoever use this Trimble CityWorks server AMS, whatever that is?
I looked a bit at the IOCs from the document, and may I just say that the people sharing SHA-256 split on two lines. Probably they have like a special, circle in hell, like reserved just for them. Like, anyways.
Why is that problematic to you?
Because when
the audience understand why it's
copy
problematic.
paste everything, and the copy paste out of the PDF, it comes as two lines of text. So
and you're putting it in a PDF. So like, you ever gotten the formatting where like it puts them out of order?
Yeah.
Like sometimes it takes the first half and then like
correct.
In between other four lines, you get the other half and there's a dash. And frankly, like the only thing that lets
Something's wrong with your mic.
Oh, sorry. The only thing that lets you recognize that this is supposed to be SHA-256 is the length. So the fact that you've cut it, you're like, what the fuck is this? Like,
Yeah, like when they put it on two tables, like on the page is like a half, and there's one table here, one table here with the SHA-256 split on lines, and you copy paste, and
look,
everything is just totally messed. And
look,
like
we fucked up when this started in a PDF. It's all downhill from
from
there.
there,
But look, I think we should put a little bit of blame on some of like the old school Twitterati. This is what happens when you bitch at people about using MD5 for no reason.
yeah, but you see,
MD5,
MD5's fit on a line.
yeah, MD5 is 32 length,
Mm.
and frankly, I'm not saying there are not collisions. We have been told by friends with massive collections that there are collisions, but I don't think that there are any significant collisions that should impact how people share IOCs under these circumstances, such that we need to double the length of every hash just so some asshole on Twitter doesn't call them out for using a non-collision proof hashing mechanism when this is just meant to signify a fucking file. Like this, make
Before you
MD5 okay again.
Before you guys went off into your inside baseball ranting, I asked Costin if this was nation state,
Yes.
and more importantly, why haven't we heard from Symantec?
Yeah, it's
Do we
interesting.
expect to get a report from Symantec? They were
Symantec didn't
mentioned
think this
here.
was a big fucking deal.
Well,
I
that's
think
what
they
I'm trying to
will.
get at. This seems to be a
I
big deal. If CISA publishes this advisory and does this thing, it suspects that there's something ugly really happened in the background.
Maybe
I
there's
don't know.
some lack of coordination, misunderstanding. Like here's a confidential report which goes to this vendor. The vendor patches it, but they don't release the patch. They release the IOX. So it could be like one of these things. But I do expect Symantec to to have a blog on it. I actually I checked the IOX
Are
with
they still
my
publishing?
who
Like, I know,
Symantec.
yeah.
They did
I
like
just know
recently.
their blog became a little more opaque. It
That's
got
true.
lost in the Broadcom desert, like
Mm,
company graveyard that is their website. And it sucks because like there's a lot of amazing Symantec reports that are now very, very fucking hard to
yeah,
find.
yeah.
But our boy Liam Amorchu is still over there. He's big shot running
Our
some of
friend
the
Vikram.
Symantec stuff.
Is
Oh,
Vikram
Vikram,
still
yeah,
there?
Vikram's still there.
Sure. I think so, yeah.
They're now part of Broadcom. That's actually in the brand. Do you know when the PR people sends a press release from Symantec to journalists, they say,
A
please make
Broadcom
sure you put...
company.
No, they say it actively in the email. Please make sure you describe Symantec Threat Hunter team as part of Broadcom. That's why I made fun of it at the top of the show. Close the loop on this. People who are
Yeah,
using
I looked
Trimble
at the
run and
IOX.
patch...
Listen, I looked at
that-
the IOX.
Oh God.
There's only one thing which attracted my attention, that some IPs were in Iran. So I was also looking at some of the domains. I don't know, they reminded me of another. There was another case of an Iranian APT that was using somehow a similar set of IOX. I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago. So I was wondering if it's maybe just a kind of continuation of that. It may very well be something completely unrelated, but basically there's no links.
You have a
Um,
suspicion that this is an Iranian operation?
no, what I was saying, there's no links to known operations, no solid links. And the only things which attracted my attention out of these IOX were these Iranian IP addresses in there. Those were like a bit interesting.
I mean, it is kind of fascinating because, before knowing that, I assumed this is maybe like it could be some like ransomware group type
Mm.
thing.
That's what I was
But
thinking as well, yeah.
but if you mention that there's any vague link to Iran, it does sound like it would be a pretty healthy, juicy target for them, considering how interested they are in like small time critical infrastructure type shit. Like, accidentally hitting the wrong dam, but you were clearly trying to hit a dam. So that apparently that's what this shit serves. Like, it's a asset lifecycle management solution primarily for a lot of these like critical infrastructure type shops. And frankly, the more I look into it, the more I'm kind of like disappointed at CISA because you're like, this kind of sounds like it's right on, like right up your wheelhouse. Like this is kind of the whole. This is like your
This is
chance
the
to
point of
shine.
CISA, yeah.
This is the whole fucking point of what you're supposed to be doing. And look, maybe
Hey, we
this
got
is
something.
well, yeah.
Yeah.
We fine.
Sure.
We got something. Not to say that like we would have gotten something better if Symantec just released it, right? But look, maybe
When CISA
we're
release it, people read it though. I mean,
But-
that's
but that's
the
the point. What the fuck are they reading? They're reading a link to a fucking PDF with 2 fucking pages on it, and you can't even click the IOCs unless you like really pay attention, right? Like, my point here is, look, benefit of the doubt. Maybe there's some big fucking push right now that they're doing with these like ISACs and whatever to patch this shit quietly, and they just needed to release a link that says, hey, go here and go find the IOCs. Let's give them that. Maybe that's what's happening. If it isn't, then what the fuck are we doing here? Because this is the most like, participation award version of trying to support critical infrastructure.
Hey, shout out to the folks at CISA still putting out these SCEV advisories, adding to the
That's true.
catalog. I mean, a lot of folks could have walked away. It did in the turmoil. We don't even we have no confirmation of a new head of CISA yet. It seems like there's a lot of turmoil there. It feels very much that there's a handful of guys there saying, "Hey, let's at least keep this SCEV catalog updated, and we get this out of it." So
I'm gonna assume Dave Stern is sort of involved in this. God bless him. But yeah, no, you're completely right, and that's where maybe I need to be a little
Tone
more
it down a
mindful.
little bit, yeah.
I need to well, also because you don't have any sitting leadership, right? So
That's
who are
the
you
thing.
banging on, right? Like
Correct.
I know folks were upset at how much we came down on like Jen Easterly, but the whole point was you're the leadership, you're the public facing part of it. The buck stops with you. You're who we're going to complain to because everybody else is under your command. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, I'm glad these people are still doing their jobs. They're willing to do their jobs. They're largely thankless. If anything, you get this like baboon every week, fucking like pouncing up and down on what you do. I'm sorry.
Podcast bozos.
I love you guys. To stand strong, but seriously, you could parse those IOCs and put them on that blog.
Speaking of which, Bob Lord and Jack Cable just got an award from a lobbyist agency for Secure by Design. Apparently, we're now Secure by Design, and they're giving out awards. Let's just close the loop on that. Last story on my
Thanks,
list
guys.
here. We're at the 2-hour mark, and you're killing me here. But I
Thank
want to get to
you.
this story. Costin, when we did the year-end wrap-up, the first episode for 2025, you mentioned VIGINUM. VIGINUM was a French institute that had put out one of the reports that stood out to you. This week, we get a new report from VIGINUM on digital interference of your presidential elections, which has been a big issue on our podcast as well. Does this clash with what your intelligence agency had put out? Is there a difference between? Give me a sense. Update us on what we've been reading.
Remember, I did put the previous VIGINUM story about Portal Combat as one of my favorite stories of 2024, and I was like generally impressed by this relatively new French governmental agency, which
France
is pushing.
is the new Dutch.
They're pushing
Whoa,
out
that's
good
some
stuff.
big words, man.
They're the new Dutch. I don't know if the French appreciate it. I don't know if the Dutch appreciate
Come
it.
on,
So you
Sequoia and the
offended
French.
both of them in the
Yeah,
same
we may have missed these people. You don't understand.
We don't fact check. We don't
For
fact
an
check.
alliance, they really don't seem to like each other a whole lot.
Go ahead,
Well,
Costin. Sorry.
nevertheless, listen. To me, it seemed like that this organization is pushing out quality reports. So they did attract my attention, and the fact that was interesting to me was that they actually care. They care about the integrity of elections, and they see the problem. A lot of people out there, they're denying there's a problem. I mean, at least they were until recently with the Romanian elections. Generally, the impression was that all these Russian disinformation ops have no impact. I mean, they are spending, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of dollars on some videos, some TikTok influencers, and there's like no visible impact. It doesn't change anything. I think that all that, it was proven to be wrong after the Romanian elections when the Romanian government, they published 5 different reports on the topic of the annulling of the elections. So what was interesting to me this week was when VIGINUM published their report about the Romanian president elections. They published a version in Romanian and they published a version in French. I did not see any version in English, by the way. But I did read the Romanian version, which was quite good Romanian, if I could say so.
Can you stick a pin for very, very quickly? VIGINUM is a private sector company? Is it attached to the French government? Who is VIGINUM?
Good point. So I did look a bit into this because in France we have ANSSI, and ANSSI is essentially their let's say
the NSA equivalent?
Superior CISA, like a more
No, don't
competent
say that
version. I
about
don't know how to call it.
ANSSI. No, ANSSI's great.
No, they're very good. They're very good. And I was thinking we have ANSSI, but here's another different agency in France, which seems to deal specifically a government agency working under the prime minister, which focuses specifically on disinformation, information manipulation campaigns. Their like primary mission is to monitor, detect, and analyze all this disinformation campaigns that involve foreign actors aimed to harm France. So what was interesting to me is that I was thinking, like, who is in VIGINUM, who works there? And what they say is
people?
due to the nature of their jobs, their identities are secret. So there's about 50 cyber warriors, if you want to call it like that, or at least that's how they say, 50-person military cybersecurity team working under Lieutenant Colonel Marc-Antoine Briand. And to me, 50 people, you can do a lot with 50 people. I mean, in great at our
$3 billion over
age,
50 people.
We were like, 47. I think that was the golden age of great, 47 right? people. Yeah, the peak.
And even that was a lot. Like, we didn't,
you can do a lot. But nevertheless, 50 people in VIGINUM, and they do push these interesting reports. So what you need to keep in mind, by the way, this report they push here, is that it comes about 2 months after the original reports published by the Romanian government. And during those 2 months, quite a few other informations came out. And there's a few new things in there, like about the entities that were involved in these campaigns, about the financing, which I think is very important, and how the money went into this TikTok disinformation ops or the influence ops. They drop a few other names like Gambling Media Group. This was a name that I haven't seen before. And there's another one called Zlodey that I have not seen in previous reports, but they also do mention the organizations that we knew about. What was interesting to me is that they do not mention one relatively important thing, which was that one of the biggest campaigns related to this influence operations was actually financed by one of the biggest parties in Romania, the National Liberal Party. So they financed that, and somehow it went out of hand. It was hijacked by unknown threat actors who just piggybacked on this campaign to promote their preferred candidate. So this is missing from the VIGINUM report. I don't know if it's missing because they didn't know that or for whatever reason, but if you want me to point like there's a flaw in their report, yes. The fact that they don't mention that one of these was funded by one of the biggest parties in Romania. Maybe they just went, they wanted to keep things clear. So the report, in my opinion, is quite important because they say that, look, what happened in Romania, it will happen in France. Like next elections come, it will happen here. It will happen everywhere, not just in France. It will happen all over the world. And like if we don't essentially start now, and if you don't understand how this works, and they do explain the fact that these campaigns worked because they didn't happen like over a large period of time. So, for instance, there were like tens of thousands of accounts pushing this content, and those accounts were dormant until 2 weeks before the election, when they suddenly, all of them became active, and every single account was operated from a different IP address, which is kind of mind blowing, and it defeats all these mechanisms where we say, like, yeah, like the spammers, they're coming from this VPN, so like we're just gonna delete everything coming from the same IP address. No, like every single account was being operated from a unique IP address, which is kind of impressive and kind of crazy at the same time. So yeah, these lessons that come with the report, in my opinion, they're quite important. Uh, and the fact that the French government releases this report, I think
It's validation. You feel it's validation
it's
for what?
not, it's
For the
validation.
annulment of the election.
It's a validation, and at the same time it's a warning. It's a warning that, you know, there's elections coming again in Romania in May. We're gonna vote again. And the way I see things, nothing's changed. Like TikTok is still
I
operating
was going
here,
to
it
ask
still
you, TikTok
works.
hasn't been banned, right? In
No.
either there or anywhere in Europe, although there's been a lot of talk. And then the other question is, even if TikTok gets banned, isn't that somewhat a new tool replaces it and the
Yeah,
same
and
kind of techniques are
I
used?
tell you that as soon as the elections were annulled, I immediately saw all these candidates switch to Telegram. So they're building the same operations on Telegram with followers, with posts, with.
Telegram
Um,
is very popular there, right?
I would say it was not as popular as Instagram or TikTok, but it's becoming more and more popular. And suddenly I see like there's all these operations they were doing, all these influence and messages they were pushing through TikTok. Now they're happening through Telegram, and probably, you know, after that they'll happen through WhatsApp, and after that'll be over Signal, and so on and so on. They'll keep moving from one to another.
Well, I think you're hitting the nail on the head on the true requirement of this problem, which is that we've hit a new type of like societal problem, and we're trying to play whack-a-mole by shooting the messenger, essentially. And it's not to say that social media companies don't have any responsibility for their content. I believe that they do. And they're the only ones that are positioned to genuinely protect us from it, which is part of the problem. But I don't understand why we think that this is going to be solved by just coming down on one particular company. And
Well, it's the
like,
most popular platform that everyone's using. I mean,
but I think anybody who knows the internet or has seen a teenager before knows that like you're creating friction with your own population. You're taking something that they consider to be entertainment away unilaterally, and you know, yeah, they're going to move on to the next thing, and you're not working with the next thing either. Like, the real issue that you have here is we don't seem to have concepts or language for describing the phenomenon that we're dealing with, which is like this mass, this creation of a seeming like grassroots mass interest in a topic. And that, like, we are social creatures. We are wired for social acceptance and living in communitarian means. Our brains do not work well when it comes to measuring cumulative effects. We are not good at understanding network effects. And by definition, in any one of these platforms, we do not have the visibility to actually have an overview of how the stuff that we're being exposed to is positioned. So when I look at Twitter and like all I'm seeing is like these right-wing posts and by like random nut jobs with like tinfoil hats, I don't know if, for example, the algorithm has selectively chosen to show me these things, if a person has decided to show me these things, or if it's an accurate representation of the fact that apparently
Those are the
everyone
things
on
you're
this
interested in
platform,
seeing.
but like, is it reflecting the sentiment of this entire community? Or is it just network effects where like you just kind of pull one thread, you highlight one thing and you don't emphasize another? And my point being, we are just not positioned as consumers to know, and B, it still doesn't, like, our brains do not know what to do with that perception, right? Like I get messages from my mom asking me about, like, well, but like the immigrants, and I'm like, stop, please, just listen to yourself. Like, you're a liberal person in general. You're not very politically savvy, but let me just remind you that you're an immigrant. You're a fucking immigrant. You're surrounded by immigrants. She's already complaining that her cleaning lady's getting deported. Like the real issue here being not what my mom believes, but rather that she has this perception based on the news and social media that this is a real problem and it's the most important problem and it's what everybody is talking about, quote unquote. And that is a different subversion of reality than somebody lying to you. I can come to you and I could lie to you every single day about something, and I can try to gaslight the absolute shit out of you, but I don't get to make you think that your entire world is vibrating and resonating about this one incredibly important topic, and that if you choose to abstain, you've somehow decided to, like, be this aberrant creature that doesn't prioritize the same problems that the rest of society is prioritizing. And that's a different kind of subversion of reality that is a 21st century phenomenon that humanity has never had to deal with before. It, like, physically could not have been a problem until after the invention of, this level of communication and interconnectedness. It is an internet only problem. And that's why I keep coming down on, like, micro targeting. I keep coming down on, like, the ad economy and, like, the ability to harvest attention in exchange for effective effects, emotional effects. And that's something that, like, sorry, that was a really long-winded way of saying, yes, we want to shoot the messenger because we don't know how to handle the message at all. And it's because we have no concepts, laws, or ideologies that take into account the new physics of a post-interconnected world.
Just to close the loop on this, I want to just flag two small sections of this VIGINUM report. One is the influencers were unknowingly used for political propaganda. There were about 100 influencers with about 8 million followers that were recruited unknowingly by these marketing agencies. And then lower down in the report, they talked about these agencies like FameUp that allowed undisclosed payments to influencers. Is there some collusion there between the marketing folks, or were they themselves unknowingly used as part of this campaign? And the French stopped short of saying that there was foreign interference involved. They would say it's likely involved, but we haven't fully confirmed that it's foreign. Where do you place, Kostian, the participation of these marketing agencies? And is there an attempt to clamp down there around disclosure? What's happening as you head into your new election?
Well, they do talk about the fact that one of these agencies, FA agency, which was a South African company, they were actually administered from Poland by another company called Gambling Media Group, and in turn, that was connected to an Ukrainian publicity agency called Zlodey, which in turn is connected to gambling sites and apparently some kind of
just a sketchy part
criminal
of the world,
groups. So it's, to me, like, unclear if all these connections are, let's say, money related. So like one entity buying services from another entity, from another, and so on. Or if it's maybe like a bigger umbrella with, multiple tentacles. I think there's still more that needs to be found from here, but for sure, the most effective way of understanding what happened is just to follow the money and see where the money came from originally, who paid for these campaigns. Yeah, true, the influencers didn't realize, but in my opinion, uh, that's I don't know if I believe it, because when
Yeah, but they
you're
remember,
presented,
right?
you
Remember,
get the
Costin.
script. Yeah,
Remember, Costin, the influencers weren't asked to promote a very specific
correct,
person. They were
correct.
asked to kind of like,
The
you know,
guy with the orange skin and the nice haircut, right?
right. It wasn't objectionable. It was like things that you would expect influencers to say. Let's go for the guy who's
Yeah.
apparently la la la
Okay.
la la.
True,
I
true.
mean, but that's a level of sophistication that I think is
Point.
important. And I am really curious, like ultimately what the outcome of the investigation is as far as like who was behind it,
Yeah.
in order to pin that sophistication onto the right place. Like I'm sorry, influence campaigns, no government has shown themselves to be genuinely good, to be genuinely as good at influence campaigns as marketing departments and like PR companies, right? Like that's a game
That's their
that
job.
that's what they fucking invented, and they're fucking good at it. So, and we haven't seen anybody act that well. So if there's a new player in this space that's doing this kind of shit well, I would love to know who they are. Is this the Russians with a new capability? Is this another political party within Romania who just hired like the Hyatt Day of fucking PR agencies in Romania, and they were just so fucking clever that they knew exactly how to do this one? I am very curious.
The report calls for France to think about enforcing stricter regulations on influencer transparency, improve detection of foreign interference, and hold platforms accountable. Are we heading into quote unquote censorship? Are we heading into regulations telling people what they can and can't say? Is that going to be part of the conversation moving forward? Costin, put a bow on this for me.
So at least in Romania, the idea is as follows: that every political campaign, when you do an ad and you publish a video, it needs to have like this serial number in the video, which kind of indicates who is paying for. Now, if
It's
you
the
ask
equivalent of
me,
what we have here in the US that says
this is
Paid for by
Right.
the committee to reinvade Vietnam, right?
correct.
Right,
This
right.
message was paid by whoever. So it needs to have that kind of code, right, in the video. And all these influencers, they didn't have any of those codes. But if you ask me, it won't change much. So even if I see the code in the video, like it doesn't matter that much whoever paid for it. But in the end, the message is the same, right? Like to me, the problem is not necessarily with the having the serial number or the code in the video, but actually being transparent about what are you doing here, what are you trying to do. You're trying to influence people to vote in a certain way without thinking about the implications, without thinking about the possible effects, and about thinking about who is actually paying you to influence people to do these kind of videos and to vote in a certain way. So to me, that is, in my opinion, is more important. So I mean, there needs to be some kind of more transparency in elections and kind of political related campaigns. I think that needs to be, and if it gets, I don't know, if that gets criminalized, so if it becomes a crime to do it without disclosing who is paying for it, I think, yeah, that can probably curb all these initiatives.
Dude, from the other side, like we have something like that, and it doesn't curb shit. Because then, like you guys, and it's even worse that you're doing with a code. But even if it wasn't a code, if you put a name, it's like the shell company for better living for children, and you're
It's like fine print.
like,
Nobody
that?
reads the
Yeah.
fine
Yeah.
print. Nobody cares. Juanito, close the show with some shout outs, some plugs. Anything to plug at all?
I have many things in mind, but actually, like this has been thought provoking. I'm mostly really interested in going to check out this VIGINUM thing. Like I don't want to keep stretching the discussion. I know, Ryan, you'd love to close it and make these
Please,
like
please.
people who can't run 3-hour
I gotta go
marathons
get the
happy.
podcast posted too. So this is
No, but I just think I did not know what this VIGINUM thing was, and I'm gonna go look it up. And
Shout out to
but
VIGINUM.
Yeah.
A, shout out to them. B, shout out to the French government, which even like ANSI is a fairly small organization compared to a lot of its peers, and it always does amazing work, has always like engaged with the industry, has always sent folks to like conferences, has always tried to collaborate in meaningful ways. And a lot of respect for them being in the fight, and how engaged they've been with like the Pegasus stuff, with a lot of a lot of different ways. But also, I would like to wrap that into a discussion, into the discussions that we keep having about CISA, into the discussions that we keep having about budgets, into the discussions that we keep having about now privateers and what cyber capability should look like. And like 50 fucking people with talent and resources and a remit can do a lot. They can do a whole lot. And I think
You don't need 3.5 billion.
you don't need 3 billion, but like, look, it's not like I'm trying to fit into some of the overly politicized discussions of budgeting right now. I don't give a shit about the budgets. What I'm saying is, we are clearly scoping this problem the wrong way when we think that the only way to solve it is going to be to have thousands upon thousands of people who are all capable, resourced, whatever. And in the meantime, we're like, well, we don't have enough people, so we're fucked. You're like, that is not what we need. We need tactical, capable talent that is being given clear remits and a mandate and some resources. And then you need to just step back, fuck off, and let them do their work.
Kostya, please, just some plugs and shout outs.
Well, for sure, we mentioned our friends at Symantec, so shout outs to Vikram, to Liam, and all the other guys in their teams, having pushed like some amazing reports throughout all these years. Again, Stuxnet, Longhorn is another one. If Butterfly or Morpho, like some of my favorite reports have. Correct. So, like, yeah, shout out to the great guys there. Again, this I feel very heavy from all these discussions about elections, democracy, lack of democracy. Where's like the future? Where are we going? So, yeah, you guys wish us luck for the elections in May. We'll see how that goes. And good luck to you as well with your elections already finished. And it seems that it's already
some
wild,
of y'all have never lived through a coup, and it shows. I did want to throw one thing in there, a genuine like thing that's like I'm fucking obsessed with right now is this new OpenAI deep research capability, and like the first insights we're getting into O3 Mini, O3 Mini High. It is genuinely life-changingly amazing. And I definitely felt like a bit of a fool, like paying the $200 for O1 Pro in the beginning.
Not anymore, huh?
Because I was like, oh,
they don't even give it for free for all this shilling. You still pay for it.
No, I still pay. Well, and I was like, I got into the public testing like the day before they suddenly like DeepSeek basically forced their hand to release some of this shit. But like I honestly, for the DeepSeek episode we had, I wish we'd have an equivalent episode to discuss OpenAI's offering, because this shit is next level. Like, if people haven't played with it, stop being so fucking cheap. Pay $200 one fucking time and go find out what the leading edge of technology looks like and how it would change your life. Like, you're depriving yourselves of a genuinely life-changing capability.
And with that, I'll close the show. Thank you guys very much. Appreciate the time. It's Saturday morning. It's about Saturday midday for me now. So
meet you in the lobby, bro.
Catch you next week.
Bye, guys.